Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to OfferZen's webinar, CTO's Playbook, Avoiding Salary Mistakes That Will Cost You Developers in 2024. I'm Jason, I'm an engineering manager here at OfferZen, and I'll be hosting tonight's webinar. Just looking at the amount of people joined, I see we're still just waiting for a few more to join, so feel free to grab something to drink, settle in. We'd love to know where you're joining us from, so drop your name and location in the chat. You can also feel free to add your LinkedIn, your Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days, to connect each other too. Hi, Kubus. Hi, Tebogo. All right, so we've got Francois joining us from Stellenbosch. Ashia from Joburg, welcome. Madalena, great, good to see you all. Hi from Bucharest, nice, fantastic. I see there's someone from Stellenbosch, someone from Portugal, fantastic. Yeah, really great to have you guys with us tonight. Okay, I'll give it a couple more minutes just for some more people to join, and then we will get started. Nice, Portugal's representing. 2 so far, fantastic. Okay, I think we're about ready to start. So yeah, welcome again to everyone that's just joined. My name is Jason. I'll be hosting tonight's event. I think just before we begin, just a few words about OfferZen. So OfferZen is a developer talent marketplace that was founded in Cape Town, South Africa in 2016. We have since expanded into what we call Middle Earth. It's an apt Lord of the Rings reference. That's the GMT +2 time zone, spanning most of Africa through to Europe. So OfferZen's marketplace helps over 2,000 companies in Africa and Europe hire curated, job-seeking software developers. Companies in OfferZen can directly reach out to skilled developers with upfront information about preferred tech stacks, salary, and previous roles, and make their hires in under 25 days on average. We also have a very strong focus on community. So we run events like this for the people and, of course, for talent acquisition professionals like yourselves. And if you're hiring, would like to browse the developers currently on OfferZen, you can simply hit request or trial in the poll that's going to show up on the screen, and we will send you a link to try OfferZen yourself. Okay, so that should pop up on the screen for you guys. All right. Okay, I see it. There's it there. Okay. We've listened to the community and we're cutting through the noise to help you bring more Zen. Our webinar series focused on practical takeaways, tips from industry leaders, and the latest insights on software developer hiring. And tonight is absolutely no different. In just a few minutes, I'll be joined by Peter Rotenbach to discuss how to avoid salary mistakes that will cost you developers in 2024. We're super excited to kick off the talk, so settle in for a great conversation. But just before we kind of get into the talk itself, just a few quick housekeeping things. So first of all, just remember that you can see us, but we can't necessarily see you. If you do drop off the video, you can come back at any time by the same link you received when you registered. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can post them in the questions tab, which is on the right-hand side. And finally, you can use the chat tab to add comments throughout the evening. So while we wait for just a few more people to join, let's try that out. If you have recently joined and you didn't say anything in the beginning, let us know your name, your company, where you're from. I see we've had lots of people already doing so, which is fantastic to see. Cool. And of course, just a big hello to all the corners of the world. It's really, really great to see so many different countries represented today. All right. That seemed to work well. So let's welcome Peter to the stage.
Good evening.
Welcome, Peter. Yeah, why don't you give us just a quick intro?
Cool. Yeah, I said good evening, but of course it depends exactly where you are in the world. But yeah, to the Europeans and such joining as well. Of course, we're mostly alone. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting with everybody tonight, and sitting with Jason and trying to field the hard questions. Just a quick thing about myself, maybe. Yeah, I see myself as a technologist. I have roughly 20 years experience. I'm currently serving as an engineering director at takealot.com. And I've been there for about 8 years now. I've been heavily involved in hiring and recruitment over these years, especially in the early years where we didn't have a full recruitment and talent team at the time. So that was very, very hands-on, but still today, doing a lot of interviews, putting out offers and things like that. So yeah, I think I've lost count. Yeah, then otherwise, my background is in technology. I've done software engineering myself with large scale concurrent distributed systems. It's really one of my passions. It's really what I like, really hardcore backend development. Software architecture, quality, I'm very passionate about, all those things. So yeah, and also the philosophy around software engineering. I like that as well. I studied electronic engineering with computer science and then did my master's in machine learning later on. And yeah, otherwise, I like to do some mentorship, love to chat with people, give guidance where it can be helpful. And lastly, I love mountain biking, spending time with my family, and yeah, home automation is a big hobby of mine. So that's me in a nutshell.
Amazing, nice. Thanks, Peter. Actually, one question I have for you. What was your kind of tech stack back in the day? Like, what did you work on?
So yeah, that was during my days at Mixit in particular. That was a very mixed tech stack. I mostly work on the eJabberD core, which was built in Erlang. Not a language that ever gained mass popularity, but I think the principle behind it and other competing languages, it does exist. So it's a tailor-made programming language for these large-scale systems. But I coded in C#, I coded C, I coded C++, I coded Python, I coded Java. So basically all the mainstream stuff. I've done some front-end development, not React, but I've done some Angular and the old school stuff, with PHP, server-side rendered pages and all of that stuff. That's kind of where my journey started. My very first job was PHP, web backend, MySQL, typical stack and all of that. But yeah, I've worked in very, very hybrid environments where it was almost anything. Yeah, lots of fun.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's quite a mix. Very cool. Okay, so just so that we're going to be covering 3 themes today. So we're going to be looking at benchmarking salaries and managing those conversations when you're hiring. We're going to be looking at managing a salary budget and its impact on your current team. And then finally, we're going to look at salary increases and retention. Will be a very interesting one. So I think before we dive into our themes, Peter, let's set off the context of salaries in 2024. So I think the first part of that is, what common salary-related challenges do you think CTOs face when you're trying to retain top developer talent?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is always just finding the right people. Even before you get to the salary point or the offer or anything like that, we know it's a very competitive environment. I think so. Most of my experience is South African based. I haven't worked for an international company, so I think many people here would have. So just understand that's a blind spot on my side somewhat. But I understand that as a South African company, we are competing with international companies. We see a lot of people immigrating. I've also seen some people return, so it's quite interesting. But it is very difficult, I think, to compete now with the massive change that we saw since COVID, where most companies just shifted towards a fully remote kind of setup. But I hope people here have looked at the latest OfficeZen report. But as we saw, hybrid is making a little bit of a comeback there. I think to the annoyance of some people. But that it doesn't surprise me. So it's a very volatile environment at the moment. Things are still very much changing. World economy is up and down. South African economy is up and down. So you have to constantly react to all of these things happening around you. I think it must be a particularly challenging time for startups. Again, if you have to compete with, you want to find great talent, but you want to pay well. Startups often don't have that much money. Yes, you might have VC capital and you can blow it and all of that, but you will run out at some point. So you have to be mindful of what you do. So I think that is tricky. Retaining staff is also hard. So you have to find them, but once you have them, you have to keep them, right? Yeah, people can get poached. It does happen. And then there's the big topic around benefits. Some people just really like benefits. Others like a more, just pay me a good salary and I'll decide what I do with my money. So also as a company changed during its lifetime, that kind of aspect can change, but we'll probably chat about that a bit later. Yeah, then there's the use of golden handcuffs. Do you use them? Don't you use them? What are the pros and cons of that? Yeah, and I think, for me as a manager, I just really want to have a relationship with my people where they can be honest with me about the expectations and the salaries and all of that. I think that makes the challenge easier. It doesn't necessarily mean you have the answer or you can satisfy everybody, but at least you understand what is going on. I'd much rather get the bad news or the tough news from my staff than them just leaving and me not learning from the situation. So yeah, I think another challenge is progression, especially for more junior talent. Yeah, I would stop at that point. So lots of challenges, I think.
Yeah, definitely a lot of challenges. I like that you bring that human element to it. Having a relationship with the staff is just so important, given the challenges at hand, and making sure you're having really honest, open dialogue. It's critical. Okay, so I think that's the CTO side. And then just briefly, maybe on the developer side. So how does the current landscape in tech influence salary expectations amongst developers?
Yeah, maybe good to touch on the COVID situation again, because I think developers experienced a massive growth during that time. Salaries really skyrocketed in many cases, locally and internationally. So that was obviously a great thing. But as with any big surge like that, there's normally an adjustment phase, a bit of a correction. So I think developers are seeing this reaction around them. It's interesting to think about, we're just entering our increases period at work, and what will it look like? What can a company afford and all of that. So there was this big growth. A lot of people got on that bandwagon. Obviously, their salaries went up, but now there's maybe a bit of a contraction. I think, yeah, growth is generally, I think, also easier for your pure technical roles, your individual contributors. Managerial opportunities tend to be less. So I want to cover the both sides, because I think software engineering is not only the tech people building the stuff, but also the managers. And I think the challenges are different for the two roles. I think there's less moving space for managers actually nowadays. So even though I think there's a contraction on all of that, I think software engineers still have a lot of opportunity with great jobs out there. probably good payment. But I think it is less. You have to be, I have to kind of work harder now for getting that opportunity. The offers are probably tighter. You might experience, from companies making you offers. Yeah, but always there are always pockets as well. At the same time, we've seen AI and machine learning really skyrocket. So obviously, there's a demand there, and not too long ago, it was something else. So it also depends a little bit of the pocket or the little clique you are in, what exactly might happen.
Yeah, for sure. There was a comment by Robin in the chat about salaries, and they did go up, and so did inflation at the same time. So it was definitely kind of like both those curves went up at the same time.
Yeah. Inflation has been, even in North America, in the US, people have been complaining about inflation. Traditionally, you haven't seen that much inflation. So inflation has been a problem across the world. But in South Africa, depends where you are. But I think people like in our positions, again, remote working, suddenly you need reliable power. So you probably had to invest in some solar system or a big backup trolley battery system, inverter system. And that's an expense to a certain extent. That's part of your inflation, your basket of money you can spend. So there's inflation, but then there's also what's reality for you, how your own expenses changed. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thanks. That's really, really helpful context just to kind of set the scene for the chat. So I think let's get into our first theme for the day. So benchmarking salaries and then managing conversations around those when hiring. So yeah, I think we'll start off with how do you go about benchmarking salaries when you're setting out to hire? Do you have any resources or kind of tips to share for us?
Yeah, so I think at Takealot, I probably learned the most around this, having had to build a lot of this up. The previous companies where I worked were a lot smaller, a lot less formal with these structures. Takealot was growing in a particular direction, and we had to put a lot of things in place. So I think where things really started clicking was when we defined a proper career framework within which people could operate, so that people can have an understanding of, what are the different job roles that we have, how are they graded, and all of that. Now, it's always been a challenge across the tech industry. There's not really standardization. What we think of as senior can vary. If I use myself as an example, as an engineering director at Takealot, should I go work for an Apple or a Google? I'll be some middle manager somewhere, kind of at the same level in a certain way, but their structure is much deeper. Their need is much deeper. They're much more specialized. Whereas at a startup, you often don't even have job titles. You're just software engineer, and you might do DevOps and dev and front and back end, whatever it takes, to get a startup going. So you have to navigate among all of that, and then how do you compare, right? So there are formal frameworks. Obviously, some of you might be familiar with the Patterson grading framework and all of that. So that's something we use as an input with our own framework. So when we do surveys, we collect some of our own data. Obviously, we have offers that get accepted, we have ones that get rejected. And we didn't always capture the rejections, but we started doing that as well to better monitor that. So it's some of our own data, it's some formal data. We love to use all the reports out there, Offers in being one of them, always doing great work on collecting information, and we can see the movements and all of that. So we collect all of that to establish then, given our different roles, what are the different bands we can attach to that, so that we know what our movements are. So that's one part of the benchmarking. Then there's, of course, role specialization. Being a machine learning engineer, it might be a bit more of a premium. You might be a bit more expensive. Mobile devs, I think, is still quite sought after. SRE is something that was very sought after at one point as well. So that will also affect things somewhat. Again, if you look at something like an Offers in report, we see how your programming language, your tech stack might also influence where you are. Um, yeah, size, maturity of the company, age of the company, that does matter because even at Takealot, which is now officially the place I've worked longest, so will be many of my references. You could clearly see how the needs have changed from 8 years ago until now. How we had to structure things more. Other bit of information that we use, um, yeah, our debriefs, the scorecards, involving the hiring manager, the line manager, the recruiter. We get inputs from all these people when we make hiring decisions. It very rarely comes down to just one person deciding. Yeah, I at least try to really think and talk through. I just had a conversation like that today. Megan said she couldn't join today, but if she was here, she would know that. Like how to exactly, where do you place somebody and what salary do you give them? It's a very hard question.
Yeah, it's an incredibly hard one. Something I've really enjoyed at Office, and I think you made a great point about having the framework and how much that works. So when I was hiring recently at Office Zen, it just made it so much easier to have like this really well laid out framework where we had our steps and our levels. We use this analogy of a rope. It's like a junior, someone who knows about the rope, and a senior, someone who knows all about the rope and how to do different knots. And we kind of like quite granularly change that difference. And it just makes it so much more effective and like being able to really place someone where that makes most sense. So I think that's a great tip.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think it's maybe worth adding that these things aren't designed to restrict people, but you need some way, you need some criteria, and you try at least to be fair and consistent. I think that is the one thing that a framework gives you. It gives you consistency at least. Oh, well, it's not perfect consistency. I'm sure there's many Takealot people actually on this chat. Some might challenge me on that, but at least we try to be consistent, and I think then people can trust the system more. Favoritism, things like that. You'd never want to create the perception that people are favorited in any way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So let's move on from there. So how do you factor in, uh, non-monetary benefits, company culture into your compensation packages? How big of a role do you feel that plays besides just salary? And yeah,
Yeah,
carry on for me. Cool.
I think for a lot of people that is really important. Um,
Mhm.
my personal preference is I just like getting my salary and I'll decide what to do with it. I think what is often difficult to convey to employees or to staff or to applicants is that it's still budget. It's still money that needs to come from somewhere, and a company still look at a total cost to company, however way you dice it or slice it. Now it depends on the perks and the benefits. There are cases where your company can make an arrangement to get you some nice group benefit, whether it's for life cover or maybe medical aid discounts and things like that. So there you have an actual saving because out of pocket you would have paid a little bit more. But anything that is just a straight subsidy or something like a 13th check, that's something that we often see being asked about. Your traditional 13th check is really just a 13th of your salary that was held back until the end. Often people say that, but they mean a bonus. A bonus is often discretionary, so that might depend on your company's performance. So difficult to give a bonus if you're a startup, right? It might not be profitable, but a big company that's already in the green, making good money, there's good cash flow and all of that, you can pay discretionary bonuses a lot easier. I mean, you get things like there's all kinds of share schemes and phantom share schemes, real shares, and um, I've even seen trust schemes where you're a beneficiary of. So there are all kinds of vehicles that can be used to give people something extra. I mean, there's also the question for which roles do you give it? Uh, do you give perks all the way through? But we're talking; these are all monetary perks. I'm touching on, there are other things as well. You can give people extra leave. That also has a value in the end. But yeah, I've worked in places where your leave days would increase with your tenure, for example, or maybe you get free parking, which was relevant in an in-office setup, or I know some companies will give you free internet. So there's like a gazillion things people can do. Some of them just these small, nice perks, and some obviously that's quite meaty. A lot of meat around the bone that can really give you something. Yeah, so I think it does play an important role, but it depends on, not everybody has the same expectation, and that can be quite tricky at a business, because the bigger you become, the more of a mix there can be of people, and people have different expectations. So what do you do? Do you just give everybody perks, but then some people feel like, I don't really care about the perk. Don't you give it, then the other group is unhappy. So yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a challenging one to work with, but yeah, very important consideration. I mean, it's somewhat related, but I'm just very curious. Do you have any specific kind of differences when you hire junior devs versus senior talent? Is there anything specific you do differently there?
Yes. Something that's been a lot of fun for me personally was running our grad programs at Takealot. Well, we still run them, but the very first one was actually started by one of my colleagues. I don't know if Stefan Bauer is on the call, maybe, but Stefan, if you are here, all credit goes to Stefan. It was his idea at the time that we should really push for something like that. And then soon after he left, which for me was a big pity. But then I decided to go on with that initiative and ran with it for a number of years before we had a bigger team working on this. Yeah, so I think the reason I call that out is that I think junior people need a bit more help to get into the work environment. So I think it's been a good marketing tactic for us. I mean, there are other companies. Alan Gray is also known. I think they also run a pretty good grad program. So there are a number of companies that does that kind of thing. There's been tremendous benefits in doing that, because you kind of build a long-term cohesion with that group that moves in before they disperse into teams, and you can, nicely influence company culture and things like that. So I think that's a great benefit if you're a junior that can walk into a job where, besides your remuneration, you get this opportunity to go through a few months of specific training and upskilling. I think that's a very, very valuable benefit, if you want to call it a benefit. But I think that is very helpful. Senior talent, you typically expect that they hit the ground running, but you should not take it for granted that there's still a lot to learn. One company's tech stack and environment can be immensely complex, and there's still a lot to learn. I think sometimes one almost neglect the senior guys from that point of view. I think part of the hiring process is also that initial engagement, your onboarding. I could definitely see from the first year, the year of COVID, 2020, that we definitely lost a number of people where there wasn't strong engagement, where the person felt isolated and all that. So no matter how much you pay them, what perks you give them, you never pulled them into the environment and made them part of the business, made them feel valuable, and they'll leave. You won't retain that person. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah, I
really
mean,
good point. I guess that's also about the company culture, right? And like factoring that into
yeah,
your considerations.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So junior devs
Great.
versus senior talent. Yeah,
Yeah,
cool.
I think last little question maybe on this theme of benchmarking salaries might be the hardest one, but that's how do you balance kind of attracting talent, but then also staying within your salary range?
Yeah. Do you mean your overall engineering budget, or like when you make a specific hire, or both of them maybe?
I think we're probably going to go maybe into more of a salary budget in the next theme. So the way I would
Yeah,
see this is more just if you have a range for a particular hire.
yeah, yeah. Some people just impress you more during hiring, and you realize that they might be quite expensive, which then kind of brings you to the point like, do you ask for what people's salary expectations are up front? um, because it's a really important element of getting through the interviews, because once you engage, there is an expectation that something can result of it. But if the person's expectations, and this is not to say it's a bad expectation, but some people have higher expectations, they come from a position where they just got like a fantastic salary, then you don't want to do that person a disservice. Um, so it's probably good to declare that upfront, but as part of that conversation, you kind of need to know what the expectations are, because you need to manage your budget. But it does happen that regardless of that, you still feel like, let's put them through the paces, and make an offer. Reality is you have to look at the budget as a whole. So if you go over a band, you want to give something extra to a particular person, you have to cut it elsewhere. But we do that every day in my current job. We will downgrade a particular vacancy to a lower level to fund up another one, because the argument is that maybe your overall throughput might be better. And I think most people probably agree that having a handful of very good seniors is it's not just the sum of the equivalent juniors, because it's not only about churning out code, it's also thinking about problems. So the value you get is can be quite different. So sometimes you really want to push it a little bit over. Yeah, I see. Ashley is asking a good question there. I think that's what he's asking. Isn't it just a waste of everyone's time if you go through the process with someone when you don't have the budget to pay them? Not if you're being honest upfront. If you, I mean, you can't necessarily upfront tell the person, look, we can only make an offer in this range. But if you tell them, look, we cannot get to what your expectations are, it will be significantly lower. Would you like to continue? And the person can decide. So I think it's just about honesty and being open about that, because for some people it really is about the opportunity. And some people are just happy to take a bit of a cut, or they know they come from a very high base. Yeah, I just believe like honesty will get you the furthest. But yes, if you don't do it, you potentially will waste your own time, your interviewer's time, and the candidate's time. And that's not great. I wouldn't like an experience if people got all the way through and then you're like, no, this is not going to work. So that would be disappointing.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great point. By the way, I see some really amazing questions coming through. We will get to them in a Q&A session later, but so keep them coming. I'm really interested to hear Peter's thoughts and
great.
sympathies.
Yeah, I'm kind of
Cool. Okay,
jumping
well,
between the
let's.
chat and the questions. Yeah, cool.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, keeping distracted by the great questions. Cool. All right. Well, let's get on to theme two. So, yeah, now it's going to chat a little bit about managing a salary budget and what that impact is on your current team. So, yeah, I think just maybe to open up with some more context, in your experience, Peter, how does a company-wide salary budget trickle down to affect your team? Like, what influence do you have as a tech lead or an engineering director, like on the size of that budget?
Yes. Uh, where I am today, we typically start off, we're very much product driven. So we work by our roadmaps and then try to understand, how many people do we need to perform that job. And that then kind of dictates the sizes of your teams and how much you would need. Um, yeah, so you will look at how you can distribute it. Sometimes you can redistribute. Um, we often bargain as managers among one another, swap out vacancies, um, Yeah, that's a strategy that we use quite a lot. Um, yeah, because like I said earlier, and especially in my current position, um, the budget is managed from the top. So we don't we give our input into the budget, our numbers, our justifications, all of that, but we don't get allocated per engineering director a budget that we can work with. We still look at it holistically, but we have such collaboration that we can. There's a lot of movement within that, um, but you have to be careful that you also have to look at how you make up your teams. I personally don't just want a team of only seniors. It needs to be just the right balance of junior, intermediate, senior people, all of that. Um, yeah, I think that's about what I can say on that point.
Okay. Just to dig into that one a bit more, so why for you is it so important to have that mix rather than just having a bunch of seniors?
I think the different roles contribute slightly different things. You have the eagerness of a junior. And that's not to say you lose your ambition or anything like that. But a junior is very hungry to learn. They can be very open. They can bring a fresh perspective. They might have learned things that you're not used to. Um, your intermediate people are typically the ones that they can work fully standalone. Um, I think that those are the real workhorses in any team. They usually deliver just the most raw code. They just pump it out really quickly and all of that. But you also need some people to think a bit deeper about technology and the problems and all of that. And I don't think you want a whole team doing that, even though you value all the input. Everybody should be able to contribute and learn from it. Um, you cannot make decisions effectively if everybody is at the top. Not everybody in a company is a CEO. It doesn't help. We all have different roles. Um, yeah, so I think that balance for me is important from that point of view. But also, if you have junior people, you need to onboard them, you need to hold their hand, and you need people to do that. It's typically your more senior people that needs to do that. So you don't want to be junior heavy, you don't want to be senior heavy. Depends on the need of the team as well. So yeah, I think it's probably a whole conversation in itself. Like how do you make them
Yeah,
up?
it is.
Uh,
Yeah, I guess the reason I ask is just I think there's been a trend recently of hiring more and more seniors, and it's very interesting that you highlight that mix because that is a strategy for kind of managing a budget, is realizing that there is value in still having juniors, intermediate people having this good mix rather than just being too senior heavy. So it's a really good
yeah.
point. Okay, and we touched on this briefly, I think, in the last theme, but in case you just have any more to add around balancing, I would say more compensation packages, keeping that competitive, while also managing a tighter budget. Do you have any kind of strategies in that regard?
Yeah, I think so. So the question is, where can you add things that doesn't have necessarily a big impact on your bottom line as a business, but is still valuable to an individual? Um, Look, in the end, it always does have some kind of impact. But is there some, like, we get birthday leave? It's just a single day, but it does make you feel good, at least to know on the day you can go out. If you know you're by yourself, you want to go running, you can do that. If you want to spend time with your family, if you want to sleep in, watch series, it's just a nice feeling thing. And it probably costs the company very, very little to do something like that. So I think there are often little perks like that that are not the golden handcuffs and the big bonuses. Um, Little things like that you can do. But again, not everybody will value that equally. I'm trying to think about more examples of little perks like that. I mentioned the parking thing earlier. Again, monetary impact, but again, if I speak personally, I'm somebody, I just don't like having to find parking, and especially it can kind of break my mood if I have to, you know, at a time when I still went into an office, and now I have to start my day by looking for parking. I just hate that. So for me, that is a big benefit. I just pull in and I walk into the office and I can get going. So yeah, what its value is might be higher to the receiver than what it actually costs the company to give. Free coffee. Okay, but everybody has coffee and you have coffee at home now. So again, a lot of things that we used to give were in office things. And I think there's still a lot of adjustment to be made, like what are the substitutes? And to many of those things, I don't have the answer. We haven't made that up. Another cool thing we do in particular is just to arrange socials. Buying people some food to get them together is always great. People love that, and we do that quite regularly now, and it's pretty cheap. For example, I used to run the Stellenbosch office, where we had about 40 people at its peak, or high 30s. But then due to COVID, closed down the office. And there was a big conversation, should we keep it open? Should we scale it down? What should we do? And in the end, I just realized it's just too much of a hassle. So I said, look, instead of the 100K per month we spend on floor space, can I get 15K of that budget and run a monthly social and just get people within a regional radius together? So there you are spending 1/6 of the money that you would have. And I think you get a great benefit for that. You build relationships and people, because let's be honest, people do like the interaction from time to time. I think a lot of people have shown that they miss that. So it covers a lot of things. So I think that's an example of something that has high value, but for the individuals, but it's low impact budget-wise. It's still an overall saving. So I think you can be smart in ways like that.
Yeah, that's super clever. Nice. Great. I'm going to get us to move on to theme 3 soon. I think I just have one more kind of question related to managing the salary budget, and that's if anything's kind of changed in your approach, given the current marketing conditions. If you did something before versus now, if there's any difference there that you could share.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, how far do we look back? I think the one thing, we are still sticking to full remote, even though many companies are kind of moving back to more of a hybrid situation. So we hope that still gives us an edge. Yeah. How has it changed? It's a really good question. We will definitely need to look at, with the fact that role compensation hasn't grown that much, how you can keep things attractive from that front. Now I'm into speculative territory. This is not something that's been agreed on by anybody that I work with or so. So just be aware of that. This is just me thinking about stuff, on air. Maybe you shift your focus a little bit to which roles you would recruit. So one strategy could be, we just spoke about finding seniors and the mix in teams. But you might say, look, yes, I need seniors, but they're hard to find. It's difficult to interview for them to really understand, are they at the level that you expect? Maybe it's better to get more junior people that come in a lot cheaper, but you can grow them and you can aggressively grow them normally without too much of a big impact. Giving a 5% raise on a 1.2, 1.5 million salary, that's almost a whole, hey, Sydney, that's almost a whole junior dev, like an intern salary, not quite junior dev. So you might shift your focus temporarily like that, but then you need a plan. You need to upskill those people. You need to get them at least to like a strong intermediate level. So I think that is something one can do. That's a strategy I would at least think more about.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're shouting out the juniors. We need to highlight them more and the value that they bring to the world. It's very good. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just a couple of things to think about then for kind of audience for looking at this. OfficeIn has released the 2024 kind of salary benchmarking report with a whole lot of data, which you might find valuable for various tech stacks, and just trying to figure out like what the data is sort of saying. Obviously, you could use this with your own setups as well and kind of look at it in the right light, right? But it is data from real world, and it can be super, super valuable to kind of just understand, what salaries look like and where to benchmark. All right. Okay, I think let's move on to theme 3, and then some really interesting stuff here that we'd love to get into. So the final kind of theme that we're going to just look at tonight is just looking around salary increases and sort of retention. So, Peter, how do you kind of approach having these conversations about yearly salary increases with the team? Do you have any tips or advice you could share in that regard?
Yeah, I see some of my managers here. I think you need to manage expectations throughout. I have a little motto, which is never to surprise anybody. You shouldn't get surprises in a performance review, when it comes to your own performance. And you need to kind of build a theme throughout. It's a very difficult balance, because you might actually get people to get jittery if you say the wrong thing. It's well intended. Like, let's say for argument's sake, no, our increase is not going to be that great. That's not what you say, but let's say that is kind of the climate at that point in time. Then if you emphasize it too much, people are just going to say, I'm going to jump ship. I'm going to stick around for a crappy increase. Or also the other direction, you also don't want to overstate it, because again, it's you're setting an expectation. Anytime you talk about any of this, you create an expectation, and managers should always be very mindful of that. Whatever you say, people are going to remember what you've said, and you don't want to go backpedaling on stuff. But like I say, you have to kind of build the theme so that you don't go like, yeah, things are looking great, the company's a great position, no increases. Like that's going to be a shock on the system. And that can really put a company back. So that continuity, data. I'm a data person, so I will send people an OfficeIn report and say, familiarize yourself with what the bigger picture is. It's not only about our company. We operate in a bigger context, whether it's positive or negative. Look at the data. You can calibrate yourself according to that. At the same time, managers should be very sensitive about these conversations, because people do care about their livelihoods. You don't know what everybody's personal circumstances are and the impact it might have about it. I mean, I don't have to ask somebody outright personal questions like that, but I can still be sensitive towards like, hey, I understand things got really expensive this year, or I remember you told me that you had to buy a new car, and might be pretty tough. The harsh reality is, though, that the company can't buy for your car, your solar system, or your new desk chair or whatever. But you can have empathy, and I think that's something that is important. Also, take the long view, right? Don't get stuck on something that might really be temporary. I've lived through cases where 2 acquisitions, and where we didn't get increases for a particular year, but there was an adjustment the year next. Now, you could argue you never make up that difference, not really. But I mean, life is so full of surprises. You don't always know what happens. So don't get too hung up on it. If you like your job, don't just give it up, I would say. So think about the long term. Yes, maybe right now is looking great. The counter is also very relevant. This year we're giving you a fantastic increase. You cannot. So we do a lot of adjustments. When we do role benchmarks, something I should have mentioned earlier. We will do it. Besides increases, we will also adjust people, bring them up, uplift them, because some people really come from a low baseline when it comes to to salaries, and you realize, like, look, this person is actually a lot better than what we gauged, or they just had a really low salary. So we will make those adjustments to bring them up. But you have to manage the expectation around that to say, look, I can't give you a 30% raise every year, right? So you have to kind of keep that in mind. You kind of have to repeat that a few times during the next year. And even so, you might see people look a little bit disappointed with an 8% increase or whatever after that. So lots of things to manage, whether it's negative or positive. Yeah, be fair. Again, framework consistency, I think is really important. Understand that lower income earners, your juniors, are impacted more typically. Something to be sensitive towards as well.
Sure. Thanks for highlighting the human aspect of this. Allowing time for emotions, allowing time for feedback. Actually made a point in the chat about that constant feedback, and definitely early in my career, like that was how my manager sort of approached it. It was just kind of like, you'll know if something's wrong, otherwise it is what it is. And even salary conversations were just like, there's the increase, like, like it or leave it,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So this dialogue you're mentioning is so important.
Yeah, I guess it's because I worked for a long time where I had the same experience, and I just felt I wanted to change that. It doesn't need to be that way. People don't have to be scared about this stuff. Yes, it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It can be very tough to have these conversations as well. But really, just handing somebody a letter on their desk and walking away is, I don't know, that's maybe not the best approach. Even if
No,
it's good.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think let's move on. So, yeah, I think we looked at like situations where it's a little bit tough. But I think on the other hand, how do you go about like advocating for raises? I know you talked about like the lower baseline and whatnot, but like, what does that actually look like to kind of advocate for your current team members in the market when you're looking at increases?
Yeah, I think we let people write justifications, whether it's a promotion, an increase, a special adjustment, whatever the case may be. Did I mention promotions? You need justification, and somebody needs to be quite well. It can be qualitative and quantitative, but you need to work with hard data in that case. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because even though you might have a really great point and great justifications, you still need to look at the bigger picture. I can at least say that many of the places I worked at, people were looked after pretty well and do understand the value of the engineering team. So I think this is not often seen by individuals, but companies really do bend a lot more than people realize. It's not, I'm pretty sure there are cutthroat companies out there. I've been lucky not to work for any of them. But I think the more decent companies, they actually do try and value people and, and try and react to the environment and not just say no to everything. But yeah, again, you have to be mindful. You're building a business, you try to grow it, you want to be profitable, because that's the reason the business exists. You can never lose sight of that fundamental thing about being a business. It's about being profitable. Otherwise, you don't have a business. So everything you do everything needs to align with that strategy in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So I think there's a spicy one that just to get in before we run out of time, I'd love to just chat through. And that is sort of your approach to counter offers. So if your team member said to look for new opportunities, like how do you deal with that? Do you typically match it? Like what's kind of your approach there?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is definitely an interesting one. I think to get a counter offer, from me at least, you need to be really, really worth it. And I need to know that you are making a renewed commitment, because it's a lot of effort to go through those negotiations. And, sometimes you have to scrape money from all kinds of places and make this counter offer just to see them leave anyways 3 or 6 months later. because the mistake that can easily be made is that it might not be about the money, right? Could be other things. And again, that's when it comes down to having open conversations about what is really the issue. No, in some cases it can just be that person feel just like they're undervalued. Others have interesting financial situations that they try to save, or maybe it's not monetary at all. But I've a former CTO I reported to. He believed in not making counter offers, and for me, it was surprising the first time we had that conversation. I just sat in his office and I asked him, like, why aren't you saying this person? Like, they're like really great and all of that. And he's like, they're not going to stay. They're not going to stay. And if you actually go look at, there is good data out there that shows like a lot of people will anyways leave after 3 or 6 months after getting a counter offer. So what have you achieved? So I think it's not so my too long didn't read answer is I don't counter, but the more nuanced answer is that you just need to think really hard about it, and you need to understand the reason why that person went out, because if they already put a foot out the door, it's kind of difficult to come back. There's a reason why they did that, and you need to try and find and understand that, because money may not make up for it. If it's just about money, then maybe that's an easy counter and you do it. But I just found, like in my experience, it in a lot of cases, it's not about that. People are fed up with an environment, or it could be a team member, or they don't like the projects. They just don't like the company anymore, and that's also okay. So you wouldn't counter under those circumstances.
Mhm. Yeah, solid answer. Nice, thanks. Great. Okay, I think let's move on to some Q&A. I'd love to get into a few of these. I see some of them have been voted for. I think we'll just need to make kind of the highest voted ones live, and then we can maybe chat through some of them.
Cool. Yeah, let's yeah. Are you gonna guide them, Jason? Or yeah, call them out.
Yeah, I'm going to see what happens if I press this button. So I'm going to take the one that's highest rated and see if I say start live answer, if this pops up for us.
Yeah, what's your opinion? Share or not share salary bands internally? Should engineers have access to the bands of all levels? We don't. Managers know up to the equivalent of their own role. Just like I don't know what the salary band for the CEO or my boss, Dave's, is, but I know, well, or even my peers, obviously, because that might be interesting. But everything below that is shared with the people that would typically make offers. Would you share that with everybody? I think that relates to the conversation. Some years ago, there was this very popular movement that all salaries must be open. Never mind the bands. You must just know what everybody earns. It's definitely a very interesting idea. I think the difficulty is that people start judging or position themselves, and it's very hard to evaluate yourself, objectively. I know some of you will object and say, yeah, but my manager doesn't really know what I'm worth or what I do or anything like that. That might be true, but I think at least a good manager will have multiple inputs, but you have to realize that you are biased. You might still be right, but you're still biased. So it's very difficult once you do that, because I think most people should value themselves a little more than what they are worth. I think that's part of ambition and having self-confidence and all of that. Nobody's going to say, I think you pay me too much. Please pay me less. That would be strange. So I think that for me is the difficulty of sharing bands, is you need to understand how to work with these things, and you learn it in management. As an engineer, you're not exposed to these things. You just see a number, you talk to your friends, and some of them might work at a different company with different bands. And how do you assess all of that? How as an individual do you then think you can judge that by yourself? So I would say, I would say no. I wouldn't make it completely open. But that said, there's enough research out there of the Zen reports, etc., you can use to get a good understanding of what is possible. So it's not like you're flying blind. There is research you can do as well.
Nice. So I think there's one kind of follow-up from Tebogo in the chat, which I think is interesting. Do you feel it's then fair to kind of ask your manager where you lie within that band? Do you like, below the median, above it? How would you feel about such a question as a manager?
Yeah, so I think answering from a Takealot point of view, that's kind of an easy answer because, yes, we try to keep everybody within our 25th and 75th percentile. If I say within, it doesn't mean you cannot be outside it, but if you are below it, we try to pull you up. You can go above it, but you kind of need to be like really good. So the short answer is, yeah, you will be within the band. And if you're not, we'll try our best to fix that situation.
Okay, great. I think that's cool. Let's move on. So I see the way it works with this is then it says that I'm live answering it. So why don't you pick the next one there, Peter?
Cool questions. Let's see. Nicole, can I? It's by date. I see by upvotes. Let's maybe. Okay, Maria. What's your opinion? Share or not share salary bands internally? Oh, that was the one we just looked at. How do you deal with vertical mobility or growth for senior employees when there aren't many open roles in higher levels of the organization? No, I don't think we've seen a lot of churn from that perspective to answer that part first. But what we say is you don't need to keep progressing to at least do better for yourself financially. So you can remain an individual contributor in our world, remain a software engineer, and still grow financially within that. You don't necessarily need to move into a different role because often with a different role might mean you will be positioned somewhat more differently within the organization as well. You might not be part of a team. You might have to deal with more business issues and business people. Whereas if you really just want to code like 80-90% of your day, it might be better to stay in the current kind of role that you are, but you will just earn more. So we don't limit people from that perspective. Oh, I should have clicked here. Right. That was the question. My apologies.
Cool. I think we have time for one more question on our list here. Looking through.
I feel like I need to take one from Nicole. Hi, Nicole. Nicole asked two questions, so let's maybe pick the first one. How can one develop a career framework that maintains specific, clear criteria while still being applicable to individuals working with diverse technology stacks and performing varied tasks? Yes. So obviously I understand more than just the question here. So I think a framework, firstly, is a framework, right? It's not designed to be incredibly specific. You typically need to work through a framework with your manager and define the specifics according that criteria or specific achievements within that. Yeah, and I mean, from that point of view, you can apply the specifics of a particular technology stack that you are working in, but the effort needs to be made. You really need to push your manager to sit with you, and you must also be proactive, right? It comes from two sides. Your manager is not responsible for your progression. They're there to support you and all of that, but you need to come up with some of your own plans as well. But then your manager needs to buy into it. They need to support you and they need to give you specific goals. But a framework is a framework. I mean, in software, you all know frameworks. You don't deploy a framework and you have a system. You build on a framework. You implement parts of it. And a career framework is no different. You still need to make a lot of decisions in order to get there.
Yeah, super good point. Great. I think that's all we have time for today. So I think we're gonna, yeah, thank you, Peter, for those answers. Really, really insightful. I've also learned a lot about the human element through all of this. So really appreciate that. But yeah, I think we've come to the end of our event. I think we're going to have a poll probably appearing on the screen just now because March is actually packed with a few really epic events planned. So if you'd like to join one of those, yeah, just select on the poll. We'd really love to hear from you guys what you're most interested. And also something that I am super excited about. We're going to be launching something really epic in March or the beginning of April. So I won't spoil any of it, but just keep a lookout for that. And yeah, I think we've covered a ton of ground this evening. Really appreciate all the chats and the questions coming through. I'm sorry we couldn't get through all the questions, but yeah, just had so much to chat through. So just yeah, really special thank you to Peter for this evening. It's been great. And to everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you from my side as well. It was really lovely chatting with all of you, and I hope people found some of this useful. And yeah, good luck with your salary negotiations.
Absolutely.